The wind carried dust across the McGraw farm like ash from a dying fire. Crops had withered to brittle stalks, the well gave more mud than water, and tempers cracked as sharp as the earth itself. Rosie McGraw stood at the edge of the yard, skirts torn at the hem, hair falling loose from its braid. She held her mother's Bible tight against her chest as though its cracked leather might shield her from what was coming. Her father's voice rang across the yard, dry as the land. "Girl's no good to me. Ain't worth the bread she eats." Ezekiel McGraw was a tall man gone stooped with years of toil, but his hands still held the switch easy as a preacher holds the word. His sons, Jonah and Matthew, leaned against the fence, smirking like boys watching a dog fight. Rose's mother said nothing. She never did. The drifter stood by the gate, hat tipped low, a grin showing missing teeth. He held a rope in one hand, as if he'd come to buy a mule instead of a daughter. A few coins clinked in Ezekiel's palm. The bargain had already been struck. Rose's heart hammered. "I ain't cattle," she whispered. Her father's gaze cut like a knife. "You're less. At least cattle give milk." The words landed harder than the switch ever had. The drifter stepped forward, grabbed Rosie by the wrist. His hand was rough, the smell of whiskey strong. "Come on, girl. Time you earned your keep." Rosie struggled, the Bible slipping from her arms. She fell to her knees in the dust as laughter rippled from her brothers. The humiliation burned hotter than the summer sun overhead. And then the laughter stopped. Bootsteps crunched across the dirt. Slow, measured, heavy as if each step carried the weight of mountains. Silas Hartwell stood at the gate, broad as the barn, beard thick and eyes shadowed beneath his hat. Folks whispered of him, the hermit, the mountain man who'd rather break bread with wolves than townsfolk. He said nothing at first. Just looked at Rosie, then at the drifter's hand on her arm. "Let her go." His voice was quiet, but it carried like thunder through dry air. The drifter barked a laugh. "And who are you to tell me, mountain rat?" Silas didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pack and drew out a bundle of pelts, thick with winter's worth of hunting. He tossed them into the dust at Ezekiel's feet. A single horse's reins followed, leather creaking. "Take it," Silas said. "She's not yours no more." Ezekiel's eyes gleamed with greed. He didn't even glance at Rosie. Just scooped up the pelts as though they were gold. "Done." The drifter swore, but Ezekiel shoved him back. Business settled. Rosie sat trembling in the dust, wrist bruised, Bible at her feet. Silas bent, lifted the book, and handed it to her without a word. From its cracked pages slid a fragile thing, her pressed wildflower, dried and faded, petals brown but still whole. He held it out, rough fingers careful as though it were treasure. "Come," Silas said. And for the first time in her life, someone wasn't dragging her, someone was offering a hand. Rosie rose, clutching the flower and Bible close. The sky above stretched endless, the horizon wide with possibility, and though shame still burned her skin, something else flickered faintly beneath it. Hope. The trail into the mountains was long and unforgiving. Rosie rode behind Silas on the horse he had traded for her, the saddle creaking, pine shadows stretching like dark fingers across the path. She had expected questions, a lecture, perhaps even commands. But Silas spoke little, his silence neither cold nor cruel, simply steady, like stone that had no need to explain itself. By dusk, the cabin appeared. It was not much to look at, rough-hewn logs, smoke curling from a crooked chimney, a roof patched with pine tar. Yet in Rose's eyes, it stood like a fortress in the wilderness. Inside smelled of wood smoke and leather. The fire crackled low, casting light across a single chair by the hearth, a rough cot, shelves stacked with tools and jars of dried roots. Silas set down his rifle, unstrapped his boots, and nodded toward the cot. "Yours." Rosie blinked. She had expected. What? Harshness. Ownership. Instead, she found a place waiting for her, even if spare. She touched the quilt folded there. It was worn, patched with mismatched cloth, but clean. Her throat tightened. The days that followed tested her in ways she hadn't known possible. The first time she carried water from the creek, the bucket slipped, soaking her skirts. She flushed, bracing for scorn. Silas only took the handle, showed her how to balance the weight on her hip, then let her try again. When she burned the bread in the iron skillet, smoke filling the cabin, she stammered apologies. Silas lifted the charred loaf, broke it in half, and ate without a word. When she split her palm trying to chop wood, he took her hand gently, washed the blood with creek water, and wrapped it in clean linen. His touch was rough but careful, as though he feared pressing too hard. Each small failure weighed on her. Each silence of his was unexpected kindness. At the trading post, whispers trailed them like smoke. "That's McGraw's useless one. Sold like a mule. Living with the hermit now. Reckon he keeps her for chores, or worse." Rosie wanted to shrink into the earth. Her hands trembled as she clutched the cloth of her dress. But Silas did not flinch. He purchased sugar and beans, then set a pair of sturdy leather boots on the counter and laid down coin. "For her," he said simply. The storekeeper raised his brows but said nothing. Rosie's cheeks burned, not with shame but with something warmer, something she could hardly name. One evening, Silas returned late from hunting, his coat torn at the shoulder by brambles. Rosie took needle and thread, clumsy with inexperience, and stitched the fabric back together. The seam was crooked, the stitches uneven. Silas examined it, then put the coat on without hesitation. "Good work," he murmured. Just 2 words, but they landed in her heart heavier than all her father's scorn. That night, when the fire had burned low, Rosie opened her Bible. The wilted wildflower lay within, brittle as old parchment. Beside it, she pressed a small pine sprig she had gathered from outside the cabin. The flower reminded her of who she had been, fragile, discarded. The pine sprig was who she might become, enduring, rooted, evergreen. Winter whispered at the edges of autumn. Frost painted the cabin windows. The creek ran colder each morning. Rose's hands toughened, her shoulders grew stronger with each log she carried, each fire she built. And though she stumbled often, she began to notice a change in Silas's eyes. He watched her not with pity but with quiet respect, as though she were a sapling weathering storms, destined to grow taller than she knew. For the first time, Rosie wondered if perhaps she was not useless at all. The mountain air had sharpened to a blade's edge by the time Rose's past found her again. It came on a grey morning when the pines dripped with last night's rain. Hoofbeats broke the stillness, fast, heavy, the sound of trouble. Rosie was chopping kindling outside when she saw him. Jonah McGraw, her brother, slouched in the saddle, whiskey in his eyes. "Well, look what the wild dragged in," he called, grinning cruel. "Our useless Rosie, playing house with a hermit." Her chest tightened. Old shame rushed back, hot and choking. Silas stepped out of the cabin, rifle resting easy against his shoulder. He said nothing, but his presence was like stone, immovable. Jonah dismounted, swaggering closer. "Pa says you sold cheap. Reckon you owe him more coin, hermit. Ain't right for a man to keep what was ours." Rosie flinched at the words. Hers. As though she were still livestock. Silas's jaw flexed, his voice low. "She's not yours. Ride on." Jonah's smile faltered, but only for a heartbeat. He leaned close to Rosie, breath sour. "This ain't over. Folks in town talk. Ain't no cabin in the trees gonna hide you forever." He spat in the dirt, mounted up, and thundered back down the trail. Rose's hands shook on the axe handle. The humiliation clung like mud. That night, when Silas banked the fire and turned in, she slipped from the cabin, Bible clutched to her chest. She meant to leave. Better to vanish than bring his quiet life to ruin. But at the tree line, Silas found her. He didn't shout. Didn't grab her arm. He only said, voice rough with fatigue and something deeper. "World's already cruel enough. Don't go adding to it." Her throat closed. Slowly, she let him lead her back. The storm came 2 days later. Clouds boiled black over the ridge, thunder cracking like rifle fire. Rain sheeted down, swelling the creek into a raging flood. From the cabin, Rosie heard a scream, high, thin, desperate. A child's cry. Without thought, she ran. Her skirts tangled in the mud, the water already rising around her boots. Downstream, a neighbor's boy clung to a branch, the torrent tearing at his small hands. His face was pale with terror. "I've got you!" Rosie shouted, plunging in. The water struck like a fist, knocking her off her feet. She fought, arms burning, lungs searing with cold. The boy slipped once, twice. Her fingers seized his sleeve just as the current dragged them both under. Then another hand was there. Silas. His grip locked around her wrist, hauling them up with raw strength. His boots braced against the rocks, his body trembling with the strain. With a final heave, he pulled them both to the bank. They collapsed in the mud, gasping, soaked through. Rose's hair clung to her face, blood ran from a cut on her brow, but she was alive. The boy sobbed, clinging to her. Silas knelt beside her, cupping her face in his calloused hand. His thumb brushed the blood away, his eyes fierce with something she'd never seen before, fear. "You near tore my heart out," he whispered. Rosie froze, breath caught. He wasn't angry. He was shaken, because he had almost lost her. And for the first time, she knew beyond doubt, she mattered. That night, silence filled the cabin, broken only by the hiss of rain on the roof. Silas sat by the fire, a small object in his hands. He turned, and without a word, set it before her, a wooden comb, smooth and carved with pine branches. Her eyes stung. She traced the grooves with trembling fingers. A gift shaped not from duty, but care. Slowly, she rose, went to the mantel, and placed her Bible there. From its pages she drew both the wilted flower and the pine sprig, setting them side by side for Silas to see. Fragile. Enduring. Two halves of her life now bound together. Their eyes met across the fire. No words passed. None were needed, but storms leave scars. At dawn, a rider came, splattered in mud. "Jonah McGraw's raising men," he warned. "Says he's got claim on that girl. Reckons he'll take her back, by law, or by gun." Rose's blood went cold. Silas buckled his gun belt, calm as always. But his silence carried weight. Trouble was coming, and it would not pass them by. Rosie touched the pine comb in her lap, the flower on the mantel. She had been sold as useless, but here she had proven her worth. And she would not be dragged away again. The morning came brittle with frost. Smoke rose steady from the cabin chimney, but the air outside carried another scent, gun oil and sweat. Rosie felt it before she saw it, danger pressing close like wolves in the dark. By noon, the riders appeared. 6 men on horseback, rifles across their saddles, Jonah McGraw at their head. His grin was jagged as broken glass. "Come now, sister," he called, voice mocking. "Time to come home. Pa says you're still McGraw property." The words sliced deep, but Rosie did not flinch. She stood at the cabin door, Bible in one hand, pine comb in her hair. Behind her, Silas moved with quiet purpose, loading his rifle, setting extra rounds on the table. "This ain't your land," Jonah sneered. "This ain't your woman." Silas stepped onto the porch, rifle leveled but steady. His voice was low. "She chose her place. You'll not take her." Jonah laughed, spurring his horse closer. "1 man against 6. You'll be kindling before nightfall." And then he gave the order.
Jonah laughed, spurring his horse closer. 1 man against 6? You'll be kindling before nightfall. And then he gave the order. The siege began swift and brutal. Shots cracked through the timber, splinters flying from the cabin walls. Smoke stung Rose's eyes as she crouched near the hearth. The air smelled of powder, of fear. Silas fired once, twice, each shot measured, purposeful. A man fell from his saddle with a cry. But more came, circling, shouting threats. "They'll burn you out." Jonah's voice carried through the chaos. "Best come quiet, Rosa girl." Rose's blood ran hot. Fear twisted in her gut. But beneath it surged something stronger. She had run enough. She would not run now. When fire caught the cabin's corner, Silas moved to smother it, leaving his rifle for a breath too long. Rosie snatched it up, her hands trembling. Through the smoke she saw Jonah, smirk wide, match in hand. She raised the rifle. Her father had called her useless. Jonah had called her cattle. But here, in this moment, she was neither. The shot cracked like thunder. The bullet struck the dirt at Jonah's horse's hooves, close enough to send the beast rearing. Jonah tumbled hard, scrambling in the mud. His men faltered, spooked by the rifle in her hands, by the fire in her stance. Silas seized the moment, driving them back with steady shots until neighbors, roused by the gunfire, arrived armed with their own rifles. The tide turned. The attackers scattered, cursing into the timber, leaving Jonah crawling, humiliated, retreating into the shadows. The land fell quiet again, save for the hiss of Rosie lowered the rifle, arm shaking, breath ragged. The cabin stood scorched but unbroken. She felt the weight of it, what they had fought for, what they had chosen. Silas crossed to her, taking the gun gently from her hands. For once his composure cracked. His eyes shone with a fierce mix of pride and something deeper, rawer. "Rosie," he whispered, voice breaking, "you've the courage of 10 men." She met his gaze, tears streaking her soot-stained cheeks. In that moment, the word she had longed for, feared, and never dared dream slipped from his lips. "Wife, if you'll have it." It was not a grand speech, just the plain truth, spoken like a vow. Her throat closed, but she nodded. Not because he had claimed her, but because they had chosen each other. Two castaways forging one life. Rosie lowered the rifle, arm shaking, breath ragged. The cabin stood scorched but unbroken. She felt the weight of it, what they had fought for, what they had chosen. Silas crossed to her, taking the gun gently from her hands. For once his composure cracked. His eyes shone with a fierce mix of pride and something deeper, rawer. "Rosie," he whispered, voice breaking, "you've the courage of 10 men." She met his gaze, tears streaking her soot-stained cheeks. In that moment, the word she had longed for, feared, and never dared dream slipped from his lips. "Wife, if you'll have it." It was not a grand speech, just the plain truth, spoken like a vow. Her throat closed, but she nodded. Not because he had claimed her, but because they had chosen each other. Two castaways forging one life. Smoke,